Welcome to the Pickleball Guru's newest webinar, I Got It, You Take It. I'm Randy Manaply, and I'm here with Prem Carnot, the Pickleball Guru, author of the best-selling book, Smart Pickleball.
Hey, welcome, Guru Nation. I'm so excited to be here on this webinar.
And as proof that pickleball brings together amazing friendships, my wonderful friend Michelle Lipscomb is joining us here today.
Hello, Prem, Randy. Excited to be here today. Thank you for the invite.
Hi, Michelle.
Through the magic of the interwebs, I'm here at my house in Northern Virginia, and Prem is back in Sebastian, Florida after his Costa Rica boot camp adventure.
That's right. I'm wearing the Costa Rica Pura Vida hat right now, and it was a fun experience. We really had a fun time enjoying the country, getting to see a lot of good things out there, the natural resources which that country holds, and had a wonderful pickleball boot camp too. It was a fantastic one, well-rounded experience.
And the topic of our webinar today, let me preface this a little bit. Growing up, I was watching Atlanta Braves baseball with my dad, and every once in a while you would see that there'd be a pop-up between two players, and the ball would just kind of drop in between them, and they would kind of look at each other a little bit dumbfounded. And my dad always referred to that as the I got it, you take it play. And I saw a pickleball game on the YouTubes one time with Morgan Evans commenting, and of course the ball goes right between the two players, and he mentions that's a divorce ball. And what divorce ball means that no one knows who's going to get it. And in case you haven't figured out by now, this episode is all about partner communication. Prem, how important is partner communication during a pickleball game?
Well, definitely in a pickleball double strategy, I would definitely suggest to have a very well-rounded communication skills with your partner, and keep it very precise, very short, but very clear on what you're trying to do during a game, be it the balls while you're playing through it, but also even before the game starts, the type of communications you have. I'm sure we'll explore a lot more about it through this webinar.
And now, even before the game starts, what should you and your partner be talking about?
I think some of the things which are sometimes very obvious to certain people may not be obvious to others. Something like, hey, this is a left-handed player. While I was warming up, I got to see that this player was a little bit weak on this particular shot. Let's try to explore those options. So it's sort of really talking to each other about that. And the type of communication, the words we would use, be it like me or yours, decide beforehand, like who's going to call the ball, like just have one person call every ball on the side, on the team you are playing in, rather than having both the people calling it, because it gets really confusing. So it's very, very important to have one person call it, and then basically have real clear words on what you're going to call it, like it's me or yours. Or sometimes, there might be words like, I'm going to go hit a hard ball or a hard third ball drive. Again, you could keep very clear words, like you say, my experience was with a long time ago, there was a Coach Moyne, one of his conversations I've had with him, said something like this to his partner, like whenever he was going to go drive the ball, the third ball, he would say something like, be ready. So, which actually gave his partner the option to attack it right off the bat, or at least be aware that there's going to be a hard ball drive. So these type of conversations can happen beforehand, so that the partner knows which other words are going to be used.
Leading into that, are there other items that you should be discussing? Like if you're a big poacher, should you let your partner know that beforehand?
That makes total sense, yes. So like if you're going to be an extreme poacher, and how much poaching you want to do and how much you want to cover, those type of conversations definitely will help the partner to know what they're up to. Especially in a tournament setup, it's definitely important, but even in recreational play, it's ideal to have that conversation rather than having a partner getting frustrated about not being communicated at. Like in life, right, right, Michelle?
Absolutely.
And what about overall strategies? Like if you like to lob a lot, and you kind of mentioned driving a lot, you were kind of talking about Mo prefacing it with, this is the shot I'm going to drive on. What about if you are a lobster, or if your third shot go-to is the drive? Is that something that you want to mention beforehand?
Well, as you know very well, I'm not a big proponent of lobs, so to speak. But having said that, I know there are a lot of players out there who would like to lob. Um, and I think that, again, it's better to communicate with the partner to say, like, this is a ball I'm going to be lobbing, or, give a very small word indication beforehand, which is preset before that you're going to lob, so that the word would indicate that you're going to lob, because obviously you don't want your opponent knowing that you're going to lob. So it might be a different word they might use. It could be a ball, just the reverse of lob, and call something like that. And then, the partner knows that maybe they shouldn't be going all the way down to the kitchen line or something like that, or wait for it. Whatever that communication is, which will help your partner rather than them running and getting smacked at. Does that make sense, Randy?
No, yes, it does. And leading on into the lob, what I was going to start saying to our resident lobsters, these are people that I know are going to lob the ball a lot. What I was thinking of mentioning them is kind of going up to them and say, look, I don't care if you lob, but the only thing I'll recommend is that you do it when we're serving. And the reason why I say that is because the lob is such a low percentage shot. If we're already at the line, there's no reason to give up our advantage of being at the line. Let's go ahead and keep it up there where we have the advantage. But when we're serving, the percentage is not in our favor to win the point anyway. So go ahead and take the high percentage shot. And if you don't make that high percentage lob or the low percentage shot, yeah, you've really lost nothing because you're not losing the point. It's just either a side out or the next person serving. Is that something to kind of mention to people that like to lob a lot, to try and keep them from lobbing every single time, even when we're on the defense?
Well, that's slightly a different take on communication. That's a suggestive already. It's already out of communicating with your partner what is going to be done together, where there's already where you're talking about suggesting, like, why don't you do this? That's a different type of communication. I'm not saying it isn't, but
Yeah.
I would probably not put that in the communication part. This is very pertaining to the game. Like, we are in the heat of the game right now. This is the few number of things we need to do so that we don't get confused about those wonderful balls in the middle, the divorce ball, as Morgan calls, or just make sure that we have all those covered, rather than at that point strategy is not part of what I'm talking about. But definitely that conversation as a strategy happens long before the game starts. So this is what we are looking for. That those conversations can happen beforehand. But while you're in the game, I think we just need to keep very clear on what conversations we want to have in terms of who's going to take the balls in the middle and how that's going to play out. Most importantly, or if I'm going to poach, is that okay? Those type of conversations should have happened before, but more than what you're talking about. And I'm not saying that is not an ineffective strategy to talk about, but those are part of communications which are not exactly pertaining to the game. I'm just more focused on the as you're going to play, what are the few number of things you want to talk about before you start?
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about right now. The stuff that you talk about before someone calls 002. Michelle's a question.
Prem, does it help when you're sharing stuff with your partner to share what your weaknesses might be?
I would be happy to tell you. Most people would be very difficult to, tell their weaknesses. We always like to amp our game more than tell what our weaknesses are. No matter what level you are, we all have our drawbacks and all our power shots, and so generally it's pretty hard to say. But if you're being honest and saying, "Hey, I do struggle with my backhand a little bit. Will you be willing to take more balls?" Which are coming directed to my backhand, for example. And if that's a conversation you want to have with your partner, that's a great one to have. Sometimes, it might be the forehand, or sometimes it may say, hey, I remember Randy talking about sometimes having this conversation with a partner, like, hey, I'm not capable of running back and picking up lobs. Would you be willing to take all the lobs behind and every ball which is being lobbed over? I just want you to take every ball. So it's a sort of a clear conversation, which really helps your partner to understand what your strengths are and what you cannot do on a given day. It doesn't mean they cannot do it every day, but at that given time, maybe they can't. And it's a great it's a great question, by the way, Michelle.
And he does this to me every single time, because on the copy that I have next is where I say, you know, if your partner is not that mobile, should you offer to take all the lobs? And of course, that wasn't your question, but of course, that's the one he went ahead and answered already. So yes, about the same time you're talking about your backhand weakness or whatever it is, if
Right.
someone's not mobile and you're the mobile one, that's the time to ask the.
Well, in reading my Bible that I carry with me everywhere, it also talked about when you share your weaknesses with your partner, are you giving away secrets in case you have to face that partner in a future match? And you basically said, no, it will make you a better pickleball player. So that's a smarter way to do it.
That's absolutely right. It always enhances you. Knowing that you are, your weaknesses, what your weaknesses are, actually prefaces you to do what you need to do to play better and smarter on those weak points.
Right.
And that was a much better segue than what I talked about with the lobs, because the next one, and this applies more for rec play, and I almost hate to recommend this, but what about talking about your opponent's weaknesses? And I say that because rec play, you're out there to more have fun as opposed to just overly crush someone 11-1 or 11-0. But what about when you say, well, player X over there has absolutely no backhand, or player X doesn't come up to the line after the return? What about discussing that before a game about your particular opponents?
As I mentioned before, in the pre-game, when you're talking about your partners, you can always also, when you're warming up with your opponents, you can already start, seeing certain number of things. Now, not everyone sees it, but sometimes people do see it. I could give you an example which just happened yesterday when I was playing with a partner, and there were two people out of town who had come down and were absolutely fabulous players, really, really great hands. But it took me in very few seconds when I was warming up to realize that one person was just absolutely phenomenal with his forehand, and the other person was phenomenal with his backhand. So I told my partner at that time, I said, here's an option. Whenever the configuration is when the person has a backhand in the middle and his forehand in the middle, just go to the middle. Hit to either his forehand or to this person's backhand. In both the cases, they're not going to hurt you because they will probably make more mistakes there. Now, these are formidable players, but they happen to be making more unforced errors. So once I told this to my partner, it took him, we were really in a bad situation. Let's say the score was reading something like 9-0. And from there, the whole score changed from 9-0 to 11-9. So it was a big change. Now, I'm not talking about winning and losing. It's more about the fact that that particular type of analysis is a good conversation to have with your partner. But now I'm not saying that everyone does have that capacity to read it. And sometimes, you might have actually someone giving you completely wrong information. And that might not be helpful. And that's when the divorce gets even worse in terms of, pickleball partnerships. But in recreational play, if they want to, refer to their partner and say, hey, I would like you to, give me your analysis or your idea of this game. And if they are wanting to follow that, then it makes it easier. But if you have two people who have very strong opinions about it, which are very different from each other, then it becomes really hard. So again, and that type of partner communication allows you to understand very clearly what can be done and what cannot be done into the type of partnerships you might play on recreational play. Does that make sense, Randy?
Yes, thank you.
And sometimes in rec play, it really doesn't make a difference. But Randy and I actually have played in tournaments together, and there's a saying that Randy has, play the pretty, because in this certain tournament, we assumed that the woman was probably the weaker player. Well, after several plays, Randy was walking back to hand me the ball to serve, and he just says, our pretty has a beard. So basically, the player we needed to play majority balls was the male player.
That makes sense. It's not always about, if you're playing against two wonderful women players or two wonderful men, who's the prettiest? It's not really the question of weaknesses at that point. It's all about in a given strategy, something works, very well. I've seen a lot of setup matchups where, sometimes the player is absolutely phenomenal player in certain matchups and completely, out of his league in certain matchups. And it's nothing to do with the skill of the player. It's just sometimes the matchups don't completely work. And so it's all, again, going back to the partner communication is to be very clear on what you're looking at. And I think I'm wanting to really focus on the recreational side is like to really keep your conversations very minimal before, and what your first impressions are. Like, hey, I'm going to poach, or, let me call all the ball, or are you going to call all the ball? I'm going to take more balls from your backhand. Whatever those conversations are, it's preset before you get onto the court, and it's actually easier to make it understandable. When I'm practicing with players in a recreational play, I might say to my partner and say, hey, look, I'm really focused on doing this. I'm not into winning here. I'm trying to actually do the third ball drive. This is what I'm going to practice. So that my partner doesn't start rolling their eyes, because if I'm doing that, without having communicated that, at least they are aware that that's what they want. If they don't want to be there, then they can choose to play with someone else, or I can choose to play with someone else. Either way, those are, requirements would allow a lot of missteps in terms of understanding of the game, but also in any relationship.
And I'm assuming that we talked about like other players' weaknesses, but what about, I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes to this, a player's strengths or more likely their tendencies. And what I mean by that is this player is going to cut or slice the ball just about every time they hit it. They're going to drive the ball instead of a third shot drop, or their go-to shot is a cross-court dink. I assume it's okay to mention that to your partner to be ready for it, or when the ball's coming to the.
You can have as many as conversations you can have with your partner. I mean, especially if we are looking at the recreational setup where you don't have that much of time, I don't think that would actually work because you are pretty much set, with certain information, keeping the conversation limited. Now, if you're talking about advanced strategies or strategies with a partner you're going to play for a long time, and then working around your opponent's structure, play, and all that stuff would be helpful information. But I think in a recreational play, that's very little happens unless you are playing the same people over and over again. Then it might make sense to be able to give those information if you already know, like 10 minutes in advance, this is the team you're going to play against. But otherwise, just keep it very simple, like yours, mine. Who's going to take the first, who's going to take those balls, and I will call those. Are we going to, respect the 2/3, 1/3 rule?
Doesn't matter, right?
All those basic conversations are the ones we need to have before we get into a court. The rest of the conversations are important. I'm not saying it isn't. It is simply not at that particular time very succinct to a partner communication. But, well, you're right, getting into the game recreationally. Keeping the words very clear, very simple would help better communication generally.
Now, moving to kind of a touchy subject, and this happens a lot in weak play. When you're paired with a weaker player, you kind of know what their weaknesses are. Even Michelle's talking about earlier, saying, "Look, maybe I don't have that great of a backhand. If you could get most of those." There's a lot of times what your weaker partner's tendencies are. And I'm not singling anyone out or saying that I'm better than anyone, just as a hypothetical. What about saying something like, look, when we're dinking at the line, chances are I'm going to send it over to the right. So be ready to sidestep over to the right so you can cover the line. Because I know that this person has a tendency to just kind of grow roots and stay in that spot, and then will let the ball get behind them once that ball goes over to the right instead of getting in front of the ball. Can you make those types of recommendations or make it in such a way that...
Sorry. Those type of conversations can be had, but I don't know while you're during play, if this is what you're going to decide. You have 10 seconds to serve or return to get ready. That's a longer sentence formation already for you to give, this is what is going to happen and this is what I need you to do type of thing. I think at that point, it's very simple to just keep it like, who's going to call? If you're going to be the alpha for that particular matchup setup, then you decide to say like, okay, I'm going to take this ball, and this is what, and then basically communicate with your partner what you are going to accomplish, in the sense like, I would say, if I'm going to drop something down into one area where I would want to expose, I want to keep Michelle's forehand as a forte, I would hit something cross court, and I would say to Michelle, come with me, knowing that she's going to be in front of that ball and protecting with her forehand. So knowing that I'm protecting the backhand, rather than going into a lot of conversations, strategies. At that point, I think it's just confusing. But if you're going to be the alpha and you're going to set up a ball which would allow to keep her fortes in place, great.
Yeah, in the case that I just mentioned, what I did was before the game, I just made the comment, said, look, I'm intentionally going to be sending it to this person's backhand. So remember to move over and cover that alley on that side. Just because I wanted her to get used to sidestepping over to cover that third alley, like you said. And kind of segueing with that topic in terms about shifting over and stuff, I've been working on going for a lot of Ernies. So especially before the game, I just mentioned to my partner, look, they're probably going to come to my backhand when I'm on the left side of the court, and I'm going to try for Ernies. Remember to slide over and get into my box when I'm off the court. Just because I don't want my partner surprised about it. I want him to expect it and know to come over, as opposed to, again, growing roots and then looking at that empty court where the other person can place it if they realize that I'm going for the Ernie.
Michelle, you might be probably would want to explain to our viewers what Ernie is, because I'm sure a lot of people don't really know who Ernie is and what this Ernie shot is all about.
Well, the Ernie shot was named after somebody by the name of Ernie who took this shot all the time, and it's actually going on the outside of the kitchen and being able to smash the ball and not stepping in the kitchen, which my last Ernie shot was not legal because I actually stepped in the kitchen after I did it. And I do believe it was Randy that called it a fault. Would you better explain?
Before I explain that one, thanks, Michelle. That's actually a very clear to the response. Ernie obviously is a dear friend of mine. He's out of Washington State, and his name is Ernie Perry. He was the one who would jump off the non-volley zone line or the kitchen line, and as the ball is about to land in the kitchen, he would take it off the air and smack it, but he would have both his feet landing outside the non-volley zone line. And so it means that he could volley because he was no more in the kitchen. And so it became very popular, and so named after a wonderful player and a wonderful man. And this has become a very common play. Generally in the high end, you see a lot of those Ernies. And that's what my friend Randy here is suggesting about him doing a lot of Ernies. And when that happens, when he's about to do that, what he's communicating with his partner to slide more, so that because he's going to be jumping away, which means that he's going to be off the court basically, which means that he's asking his partner to slide more and take a lot of area, because in case the ball comes back, they're ready to pack a punch. So that's a wonderful conversation to have. Again, just have to find keywords which you are going to do, rather than calling it Ernie or rather than calling it whatever you want, slide over more. Really keep your conversations, little. I know a lot of people even saying me, yours seems very distractive to their style of play, and they feel that it actually, they can't do it, and they just get stuck a little bit. And so, keeping words very simple and of what you want to do, like me, yours, if you're going to go and do an Ernie, automatically just, have your partner say yours next. If that's coming their way, so that they're ready for it. But these are conversations can be had beforehand if this is what you're strategizing beforehand, so that those can be set up.
Just to provide a quick summary of pre-match communication. One thing you can tell people, if you're a big poacher, let them know that you may be going after a lot of poaches, lobs, including maybe when you're going to take them. You can talk about your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, as Michelle brought up, your tendencies and maybe even your partner's tendencies and weaknesses, and your opponent's tendencies, especially like if someone's receiving a serve and say, this guy's going to cut the ball, so get ready to slide over to it. So let's move on to something Prem obviously wants to talk about, which is in-game communication. And before we get into this, and this is something that should be discussed before the game begins, and that is who is supposed to be calling the game and why should this be an issue, Prem? You kind of discussed this a little bit more, but now's your chance to be really explicit about it.
Who should
And-
call? Who should call the ball is a very again, it's a very fluid nature of it. It's someone who really is comfortable about who's going to call the ball and knows, at least has a more better read of the game, or at least feels like they have a better read of the game. But in recreational play, it's very hard. Either way, I without going into trying to make it as a hot topic. Mostly, I really want them people to understand is like decide who wants to call every ball. It doesn't matter who's the person, the weak person or the strong person. Decide one person calls the ball and calls every ball, starting from beginning to end, so that there is a consistency of who calls the ball. And even if it's called wrongly, at least there's someone calling it. For mid-game, you do decide that, okay, I'm going to be the one who's going to call. Let's change that. We can always do that too. So there are a lot of options that way, but generally, I really want one person to call the ball on one team, on the side of the team who they're going to play with. Decide before who calls it, and make it very clear who they're going to call every ball. For recreational plays, I would really suggest them to go for calling even the most obvious balls. Things like, even if it's a return of serve, pretty much, or there's no person who's going to return it. Yours is an obvious one, but it allows you to be more conscious about your calls, and then it allows you to be much more free-flowing after that. I remember way back when I used to play, there used to be a gentleman who would, as the ball would be served to me, he would turn back and say, good. And then at the beginning, I would wonder why he would keep telling me good. I mean, it's obvious to me the ball was good. But most of the times you're watching the ball and not always the line. So it allows my non-receiving partner to turn back and say, hey, ball has landed in the zones, hitting zones, or it has gone out of bounds. So because we're focused on the ball and so forcefully not watching all the lines automatically, it is always a good way to communicate that way too. And it was helpful to understand why he was saying it. At the beginning, it sounded obvious to me. So definitely calling every ball at the beginning will help, and then systematically just one person call. Make sure again, call one person calling the team and not two people, because otherwise, it's like in the communication theorems that we talk about is generally, if you have a small little pipe and you're trying to shove a kerchief on both the sides, and at some point it gets blocked. So let the communication be just one way, free flowing, and it could be the other way also, but it has to be, it has to go through the tube so that the other communication can be heard. That's my suggestion.
And essentially what you're saying is one person calls it, so that way you don't have each person going me, or even worse, each person going you.
That's right.
And what should this communication consist of? I know you've been saying me and you. Some players that I play with, they say I go, you go. You generally don't recommend that. I mean, you'll always say people can do what they want, or there's no one way to play, but why do you recommend just saying me and you as opposed to something else?
Well, you could say, moi, toi, tu, whatever you want. But having said that, I'm just trying to keep as the syllables as short as possible so that it's not confusing. I go, you go. I remember, there was a time I used to say, you take it. And in fact, when I used to say, you take it, my partner would hear only the take it part and not you take it. And so then they thought, oh, it was my ball because I heard you say take it. So again, you see, you take it, goes. And obviously, I understand sometimes I might mumble under my breath and it might not be heard clearly. And if it says you take it, and if they only hear take it, then it's completely a different one. Whereas me and you, that's pretty straightforward. I don't think you would confuse both those words. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but it is something which if your partner is predisposed to hear completely and understand it, that's fine. But when you're playing recreationally, I'm just trying to keep the words very straightforward and simple so that it's easier. I mean, as I said, you could use any words. If there was, I would say moi toi when I used to play with my female partner before, because she was a French speaking person, so it was easier to use those words, and it still remains pretty straightforward. But me and you are more easier than moi toi, even because the moi and toi still has the wow wow noise on towards the end, whereas me and you are very clear. It's the noise, you can hear which is me and which is you. There's no, but you can say you take it. I mean, I got, you got, but then if you only hear got, which one got it? So again, I'm not saying there's no right way or wrong way, but keeping it simple. KIS.
What about one further than that? What if the ball from where I'm standing looks like it's going to be out? I play with some people that yell out, which is probably not a good idea because your opponents then feel as if you called a ball out. I play with some people that yell no when they assume it's going to be out. And then I play with some that yell bounce it. So what do you recommend?
So the question is, when you think the ball's going to go out, what do you say?
If it's an obvious one, again, you can call it out, you can call it let it go, or whatever you want. I mean, I personally use it, bounce it, personally, so that they have an option, But either way, even if your opponent thinks you call it out, that's part of the partner communication. It's not illegal, or it is not a distraction intended for their opponents. It's a partner communication. So whatever comes out first and easy is the word you want to use. I use bounce it to give a little bit more time. Sometimes I might say no, and sometimes I might say out. Either way, depending on situations, but most probably I would say bounce it. Most of the time when I'm talking about bounce it, it's a ball which is little high enough and slow enough for me to give them that indication, because it's already a longer word.
Right.
But whereas sometimes it will be most of the time I make a little screeching noise or a little rumble in my thing. I'll say or something like that, for them to understand that maybe you shouldn't be taking that. So most of the time, and I think that's something which comes from tennis, because tennis you're not supposed to communicate that way. So people would use words. I mean, would use noises, and so I use that, like don't touch it type of thing. But most of the time they touch it anyhow.
Yeah, I think what you were getting was his "don't back up" grumble is what you're hearing a second ago. But Michelle brings up a really good point, and this is one of the things that we've heard. And just to clarify what goes on in the rules as a distraction or into play or whatever, from what I understand, before the bounce, if you yell that it's out and it falls in and you keep playing it, the ball's still live. But if it bounces and you yell out, then it's a dead ball and it goes back to your opponents if the ball did turn to be in. Is that a correct summary of that rule, or?
If you communicate before the ball bounces, yes. But even if it bounces and if your partner still plays it, it's still alive.
Even if they call it out?
And they play it.
After the bounce?
After the bounce, and if they play it, and if your opponent plays to it, it remains still alive. Sometimes you miss it, it's totally different, But generally, when you call it out, and at that point, your opponent can always oppose and say, "Oh, you call it out." After the bounce is over, and then if they stop playing, that's totally fine.
Okay, let me clarify the scenario, because this is what I don't understand. The ball comes in, the ball bounces. Your side calls it out, but then keeps playing. Right after the bounce and they call it out, doesn't that make it a dead ball at that point?
And if the ball is being hit, and if your opponent hits the ball, and if you stop playing because you called it out, that is totally fine, and then it remains a dead ball. But if the play continues, like if, say, for example, the ball has gone that way, it's hit, and it's come back to you, and you start hitting it, you've kept the ball alive. So then
Okay. So if it's on the other side, where the ball bounces, they call it out, they hit it back and play through anyway, and then I say catch the ball, says no, the ball was in, it's our point. It would be our point then, correct?
If you had made a call, not them. If you've been called, if you and I are playing, let me put the scenario in a if you and I are playing, I call the ball out. You're going to go for a ball. You're about to hit the ball, and I call it out, but you still hit the ball. The ball goes on to the other side. Our opponents hit it back to me, and I still hit the ball back. I've kept the ball alive, which means that whatever call I made no sense anymore, because it means that I have somehow overturned my own decision. But if the ball come back to me and I caught it because I already said, hey, that was a ball which I called it out.
Yeah.
So then it remains out at that point. But if I had continued playing, then it's still alive.
Okay.
Or you went on to play that ball, next ball. Either way, you had kept it alive. That means that's overruled. But I don't think that's pertaining to this particular webinar. Does that make sense?
I think so. But either way, if the ball's in the air and you yell out,
no,
then and it bounces, no matter what it does, it bounces in, and or let's say it bounces in and you keep playing, the other side can't go, well, you called it out. That's on them at that point. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Do you have something else?
Nope.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
I always joke that when I call it, I immediately punt it and put it into the net. Is it enough for your partner to know to take it when you say you, and just assume that when he or she doesn't hear anything, that I'm going to take it?
If you have the time to do so, yes.
Okay.
If you have the time to do so, if they don't hear it, someone has to pick the ball up. So, someone has to, do it. If your partner doesn't hear it, then you have to pick up the slack if you can. If you can, then, maybe after that particular point is over, rally is over, just recommunicate with your partner and what intentions are, and they want or they don't want. I remember, 2 days ago, I played in a ladder league where I made it very clear this is what I'm going to do, and then one of the person in the ladder who I was playing with said, no, I really, really want to play. I don't want to be poached at, and so I let it be. Even though it was a ladder league, I let it be, and then it was what it was. So it's irrelevant of the result. It's basically, just have to be accepting of where your opponents and your partner are, rather than assuming that they will be always in accordance with you.
And setting aside calling, not calling shots, because there's not much communication going on in rec play anyway, you also really can't assume that your partner is going to take it, even though it's coming to his or her forehand, just because that's in the middle, right?
That's right.
Yeah. In other words, you can't go in just assuming that everyone knows what the call is going to be beforehand.
No, I mean, obviously that's why we are here, to be able to, impart more and more information about, smart pickleball and how the game is played and how to understand the court well. We keep giving a lot of information out there, and I think we are continuing to wanting people to play smart. But, part of that is also imparting some information like partner communication, which is very important. And that helps to do that. I don't think we should assume anything to start with.
And going on to a slightly different subject, at one boot camp, I was playing with one of the participants. He did a cross-court dink. And after the point, what I mentioned to him was, I didn't mind that he was doing a cross-court dink, but when he did it, he pulled me all the way over to the third alley. And after the point, I mentioned, look, if you're going to do this, fine, but you need to come over because I'm going to have to go all the way over there. You need to come over with me and cover the middle. This is kind of like mid-game communication. Is this something that, it's obviously something that we should talk about when you're with partners? What about during rec play and stuff like that? Or is that overstepping bounds?
Obviously, they've never been to a Prem clinic or boot camp where they learn how to dance with their partner.
This was their first boot camp with Prem, actually.
Well, Michelle would be the first one to say, you guys play a lot of pickleball together and you play a lot around in that area, in the DC area. So I'm pretty sure you get to see a lot of players of different skills and, and talent. And also, so I wouldn't assume anything. And that type of conversation is, as far as I'm concerned, is a little bit more you want to give at that given time during playtime. Unless you have a receptive partner, even then I would probably suggest that to hold back on it and probably communicate later on, because it's just recreational play. Either way, recreational or tournament play, as I always say, you don't carry those medals and glory to your graveyard. So let's not even spend a lot of time trying to figure out all that, being as much as possible, if we can be the best possible person we can be for ourselves. That's probably the best thing I would suggest. And in the bargain, if you have great friends like you have with Michelle, and it's a big plus. So it's only pickleball, as I say.
It's only pickleball.
It's only pickleball.
So this sort of segues into the next one. What do you do when your partner ignores you? For example, you call the ball and then they just step in front and take it anyway.
The divorce line. There's nothing much you can do about it. Obviously, there's not much you can do in recreational play. If your partner still wants to take it, there's not much you can do. At that point, it's as I said before, like in the ladder play, it's futile to try and break your hand and get frustrated about a situation which you don't have control over. You and I talk about this a lot, Randy. You know very well. I'm happy to control the controllables. The uncontrollables, not so much. I'm only responsible for my own particular game, and if I can eventually help someone be more responsible for theirs, that's totally fine. But otherwise, I enjoy playing my game.
We already talked about what to say when the ball, when you think it's going out, you say bounce it. Typically, I just yell out no in an overly dramatic fashion. A friend of mine says watch it. And generally, all those are fine. I think bounce it's probably the best one because it communicates, action as well as caution on your part. What about when the shoe's on the other foot, when your ball is going out? What about yelling hit it or hit it back to try and encourage the other team to not let it go out?
That would be probably termed as taunting.
But not a distraction.
Or distraction.
Okay.
Either way, I would not, I would keep my communication with my partner, not with my opposing team. So in a more trash talking game, if that is what we want to do, that's totally fine. But I would not recommend that one as a thumb rule to anyone.
And we kind of talked about lobs, especially when you say bounce it or watch it or whatever. Some players, maybe even mistakenly, automatically switch just because they see it's a lob. So they're like, okay, I must have to switch. Regardless of where it is, they just assume that their partner's going back. So they've heard, okay, well, I need to switch. Just so everyone understands, explain what a switch is and why it may be needed. before we talk about who calls the switch?
Again, it's part of the communication of whoever the person who's decided to call every ball is an important thing. Is stay with the same person who's going to call the ball. Normally one of the recommendations, I think we have talked about this in the articles in the past about a lob. Excuse me. The lob, generally, if it's lobbed over you, your partner normally goes and picks it up, and you switch at that point. And generally, you switch and watch what your partner is about to do. They might be able to get in time and be able to do a perfectly wonderful drop shot. Sometimes they might not have no time, and they might just just throw up another lob out there, a defensive lob. And if that is the case, then you make some adjustments of backing up a little bit so that your partner who was just lobbed can get somewhere in the midcourt area or the no person's land area so that they can block and then get back in. But otherwise, again, it remains pretty much the same. Excuse me. It remains the same for any matter what. It's just the one person calls. No matter what it is, if the person is being lobbed at who's calling the ball, they say, okay, switch, I'm taking it, switch, and then you're taking it, I'm taking your position, and then if it's being lobbed over your partner, you say, I'm going to go mine, and you go and take it, then automatically the other person switches.
Yeah, you say it's the person, but I was just thinking that let's say the person going back to cover the lob is the person calling the game. The person up front may have a little bit more time to assess the situation and know whether the switch is going to take place or not. And even then, let's assume that the person calling the game is the one at the line and it's the other one going back. You can say switch, but what if you're not switching? Do you say stay or do you say don't switch?
Most probably I will say switch anyhow, because you don't want to be like what I would call the dreaded eye position, where you are right in front of the other person who is just behind you. That means you're pretty much on a straight line behind the other person. I wouldn't want you to be in an eye formation is what I'm talking about. Like in playing, we talk about eye formation. So I would probably still want you to be in diagonal so that the person can actually see and make the assessment after that.
Right. And the next topic, and this is during in-game strategies. And to start off with this, I don't do this to the lower level players, but meaning the more novice players. But there's this one particular guy that I love doing it to. When my team is receiving and I'm up at the line and I notice our opponents who are serving, one of them is up at the line, I'll be pointing like this frantically behind my back, hoping that my partner who's receiving sees it. So that way he or she can toss up a nice big cream puff to the person at the line. Likewise, when I'm receiving the ball and I see this person up at the line, I'm waiting for that third shot volley. But speaking of surreptitious signals, especially when Tyson McGuffin and Sarah Ansbury are playing together, you'll see, especially when Tyson's up at the line, you'll see him either with a open hand or a closed fist. I think sometimes I'll hear Sarah actually go, got it, signaling to him that she saw the signal. What signals are they using, Prem?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's not only with them. In fact, a lot of good players out there. It comes from tennis, and probably it's probably a military term, when you say hold, that means you're staying in the same position, whereas open is saying you're going to split. And so it's in the same way. I guess the understanding of it is when one is about to receive and the non-receiving partner is at the front of the line, if they want to strategically change positions or they want to stay in the same position, you know, when they have a closed fist, it indicates that they are telling their partner, I'm going to stay at this line up where I am, and which means that by keeping that on the back, it's basically the person who's receiving obviously can see that and read and say, communicates back again. Part of the partner communication says, yes, I got it. That means I'm going to come straight down. And if it's an open fist, open signal, which basically means that the person says got it, that means they're going to swap positions. So after the return, as she's coming in, she's going to go diagonal and let the partner move to in front of her. So these are type of signals which are commonly used in high-end professional pickleball also, and competitive players do tend to use that if they want to change strategies rather than doing what you call an Australian or a half Australian, as they call it, which is all about stacking. It's how you stack. You want to have a full-on stacking or a half stacking, which means that there's more angles to run to and cover, and this could be an easier one also to do. So these are all part of communication comparatively to what you talked about, Randy, is hand signals, hit to the other person from the back, indicating, all those are part of obviously communication. They're very important part. Like in life, I said, communication is a very important skill set to have, and partner communication in this game is not any better than anything else in life. Everywhere, communicating clearly makes relationships a lot easier on a pickleball court as well as in person.
And I think the last item I have on my list, and this is where I get to test Prem on his knowledge of pop culture and stuff in the US, is an old-timey meal prep kit that's not as popular as it used to be. So I'm going to see if Prem has any clue what I'm talking about here. And he kind of referenced it earlier. Meal prep kit.
Kit.
The shake and bake.
Sorry?
The shake and bake.
Oh, the shake and bake. Yes, of course. I never knew that was a meal prep kit. Yes, I do know the shake.
What I say. I get to test Prem about American pop culture. But you were talking about especially how what Coach Mo would say when he was going to drive the ball instead of doing a third shot.
Third shot drop, yes. Yeah, he's basically indicating, giving his partner the option to go and attack it, hoping that it might be a pop ball, and then if that is the case, then he's going to come and attack the ball and finish it off. So popularly, obviously called in the professional circuit as the shake and bake. So they basically shake the tree and make sure that the opponent just pops the ball up, and the other person comes, flying in and obviously tries an overhead and smashes it down, making it a clear winner. It's pretty common in the professional circuit, the shake and bake strategy. Doesn't work anymore that much great because most players know that strategy, at least on that level, and but it's still a good, surprising one to have. And again, part of the partner communication is important. And as Mo said, in his communication, he said, "Be ready" was a word he would use to let his partner know that he's going to drive, rather than saying, "I'm going to drive the ball," writing a long word. Be ready means his partner already knew what's going to come. So,
and Prem and I have monopolized a lot of this time. So what other questions do you have about communication, Michelle?
I'm fine. Prem answered my question.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
You just have the one question?
Just had the one question.
Okay. So anything else?
Enjoy having Michelle here. I mean, I met Michelle a few years ago in one of the clinics along with Randy for the first time. And I'm very grateful for having met you both, and especially now Randy's part of the Pickleball Guru team, and no words can express my gratitude to this man who has been a big backbone to our business. Thank you, Randy.
You're quite welcome, and you're very kind. So a quick summary of actual in-game communication is one person calls. You should call every shot. Out, the recommended one is bounce it. We talked about lobs, and it's whoever's calling it should be the one that switches, and talked about a few pre-shot strategies, such as when Coach Mo's about to drive the ball, you need to be ready to fly up to the line and do a shake and bake and hopefully put it away. Is there anything else that you want to add about partner communication, Prem?
Just go have fun. It's only pickleball.
Only pickleball.
And Michelle is here because she told me that she's interested in attending one of the boot camps this year. And full disclosure, Michelle is one of my absolute best friends in the world. And as Prem was talking about earlier, Vicky on the Eastern Shore claimed some of the credit for me working for Prem now. But a lot of it goes to you, because I think you were the one that set up a lot of the clinic in 2016.
Yeah, we were very lucky to attend 2 of your clinics, and I mentioned to Randy thinking he might want to come to it. And as soon as I mentioned that Prem was the one that was it, he was all about it then. That was his hero, so he was there. But I'll share the credit with Vicky. I love Vicky, so I'll share the credit with Vicky. So yes.
So let's start off with why you're interested in attending one of Prem's boot camps. Is it that overall you just want to improve your game? Do you feel you're stuck at a certain point and want to get to the proverbial hump, or is there another reason behind it?
Well, a little bit of everything. I will say that the 2 clinics that I took with Prem were definitely game changing, and I thank you for that. But I have reached a plateau in my pickleball playing. Part of the reason is I don't put as much time in it as I'd like to, but I'd also think that maybe coming to the boot camp would jumpstart something along the ways as well. I feel like I've reached a plateau. I do have a couple weaknesses. So one of my questions to you about the boot camp is, during this time in the boot camp, is there any time for individual, and I don't mean private, but chances to work on what might be a weakness?
Oh, for sure. There's no doubt about that. There is a set agenda. We go through the boot camp over the 4 days. We work together, but there is a lot of one-on-one times also, and there's a very specific session which is meant for that time where we would work on your particular points which need improvement, or I would assess it and make sure that and come up with a very individualized game plan on what I want you to do, and how we could do it. So we work together about what you want to do and how that you take that back home, and how I want you to implementing it so that it would help you onto particular to game. And as you know, most of the boot camp are only limited to 8 people, so it means that it's a very individualized attention over 4 days. As we say 15 plus hours of coaching, but Randy and I would be the first one to tell you we've spent probably maybe the double of that on those camps, and given our heart and soul to really give each one of the participants, all the 8 people who come there, a very, very well-rounded experience, be it the external factors like food to the sessions itself. Everything are taken care of in that way. It's really pleasant. I generally recommend for people who really want to take the game to the next level.
Very good. And during these boot camps, what are the ratings of the participants? Does it matter if some of them are not quite as 3-0? Does it matter? You just have 8 people. How are you doing with the differences between the ratings?
That's a very good question. I generally recommend players to have a certain skill set. So generally, some consistency. When I call them like a 3+, 3-0 plus and over. Generally, people who have a certain consistency in their game, they are able to get their serves and they are able to hit their returns in, and have an understanding of the drop shot, even if they are not as consistent as they want to be. I don't know if there's anyone who's as consistent with drop shots unless they are really top pros. But having said that, just having a good understanding of game strategy will allow me to take them to the next level easily. I'm not saying for this boot camp, but I mean there are other classes, clinics, and workshops we can help with at different levels. But in this particular boot camp, that's the minimum requirement for them to ramp up to the next level, and it will be helpful for me from that point of view to push them to the next level.
Just so you know that I still, every time I play pickleball, hear you in my head telling me to loosen my grip, bend my knees, and don't back up. Just letting you know.
Thank you, Michelle. And a lot of people in the boot camp will tell you that even more because it's 4 days and it's very intensive, and they'll hear me growl a lot and probably tell them that maybe a million times to each and every one. And so it's sort of reinforcing them with that, and so that it keeps being heard and systematically. And it does, Randy and I have seen a lot of, testimonials and people who have written back to us how those experiences have been actually very supportive and helpful to them. And, it's not really about what we do, even though that is important. I think my greatest joy is generally when I see light bulbs come out and they're able to actually execute what they wanted to do, and they do what they do well.
Very
It's
good.
a happy space for us.
I like your teaching strategies, so you will see me this year.
Thank you, Michelle.
And do you have any other questions?
No,
That's it?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, feel free to add in with anything else as we go along. One other thing I want to emphasize, because I still get questions about this and people are still surprised. When we say that we limit boot camp to 8 participants, it's 8 participants. It's not a 16, it's not an 8-to-1 ratio to where you have 16 players and 2 coaches or 24 players and 3 coaches running around. It's 8 players and Prem. Hopefully I'll be there at it too, but the ratio is 8 to Prem as opposed to just 8-to-1. We don't allow more than 8 participants to come in at boot camp. So I'm not saying it's exclusive, but we do that so that way you get all of Prem's individualized attention, because you were asking questions about, well, what about your specific weaknesses? This is probably the most individualized boot camp out there that focuses specifically on your game. And I apologize, I was getting some more water when Prem was talking about that, but there is a one-on-one session later on to where Prem spends 30 to 45 minutes with you. And then I know you talked to her about like pickleball homework, to where you give her a set list of things that, okay, this is what you're strong at, this is what you really need to work on if you want to improve your game. I think Prem also mentioned that boot camp takes place over 4 days with 7 sessions. It's well over 15 hours of instruction. We run it, I think, going 20 to 22 hours, if not more, if the participants want it. The other thing I'll add is when Michelle talked about the varied skills or varied ratings of the boot camp participants coming in, generally the first session is evaluation and assessment. That's where you get a general idea of where all the players fall into different skills and abilities.
Yeah, we did talk about that one, and it's as it's only 8 people, generally we see a lot of players between the 3.4 category to 4.5 generally. And during the first session of evaluation, we sort of already figure out generally there's a either it's a pretty homogeneous group all the way around, or it might be just a group which has 2 different pods, with one being a stronger pod and another one needing a little bit more help. And we haven't really had very much disparity in terms of skill levels. It's been very easy transition to get players to play, because we have a minimum requirement of them being at least a 3.0 and over. Officially rated or not, at least what we're looking for is them to be more consistent. And before there's a easiest way to do that is to go on ratingsandgoalsguides.com, which has our free a downloadable application, which will basically tell them, it's a sort of a flow chart, which basically gives them an idea of where they might be in their skill sets. And that allows them to jumpstart if they want to go to the next level and help them. And if they're below that, they'd also would have suggestions for every level, what they need to do to get to that next level in terms of at least getting into consistency factors. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question, Randy?
Absolutely. And after that first session, then you move into the second session, which is drop shot till you drop, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. That's a session which is all about drop shots, and it's a really very important one. A lot of people struggle with drop shots. Now, we talk about different versions of that drop shot. It could be the third ball drop shot, fifth ball, or the seventh ball. Either way, we've worked the drop shots as the session has said, till you drop. Basically, we will work on different ways of how to hit a drop shot, the techniques to it, but also how to, counter a bad drop shot and what you do in that case and how you still approach the net in a way safely without losing momentum of the game. So there are a few number of things which happens there. Lots of drills, fun session. Generally, people really enjoy this one, and by this session, they are pretty confident about how to get their drop shots in consistently.
And then moving on to the third session, which takes place on Saturday, that's how to become a shark at the net, Prem. This is
Well, in this
all about
particular game, yes, in this particular part, it's really all about the net play, and it's all about how to be very, very effective at the net, be it the dings, the volleys, the putaways, just to make very clear on how and when you're going to do it and what type of dings and what type of volleys and what type of a few number of strategies are analyzed and worked, and consistency is built during that time. And so it's a really a bunch of strategies to run. Net play is also applied at that particular session. Fun one, and a lot of people get a lot out of it in that particular session.
And then the next session is, and this may be one of the things that Michelle wants to follow up on, because I think she asked about this earlier, which is consistency. And at least from my perspective, when I'm there, this is the one that I hate most of all, because what Prem does to me is he makes me stand on my side of the kitchen and drive balls at him while he stands up there and just kind of nonchalantly blocks them. And I'm not built for a marathon. I'm built for short bursts of speed. So after 30 to 45 seconds, I'm winded, and he hasn't moved hardly an inch. And I'm putting everything into this. But this is where a lot of balls get driven at people. We pull out the two ball machines, and they come flying at people, so that way they can develop the skills to consistently keep blocking these balls and to get them to go where they want them to go.
Yes, this is one of the sessions where a lot of people, when we've seen this on the feedback forums, when before they come to boot camps, you hear a lot of people really struggling with those hard balls being hit at them. I don't want to target anyone, but generally it's a conversation which generally comes from a lot of my female participants or female players who tend to be very annoyed or really scared about these big burly men who smack the ball so hard at them and they don't really know what to do about it. And I'm not making a gender difference here. It's simply that's one of the things I've heard generally about how it is, being aggressed at and just not knowing what to do with those type of hard balls coming at them. They're smacking it so hard. So this particular ball session is really, really fun because it allows them to really control. And at the beginning, obviously, like anything, like they feel like those big burly people coming and hitting them hard balls, and they are really scared about it, and they do get hit a few times with those ball machines. But we learned a lot about the techniques, and they actually stay there. And then after a couple of times, they actually like, oh, this is much easier than I thought it was. and they would come back again to get a few more ball machine sessions, just because they just want to get confident. And these balls are not coming slow. I guarantee you, they're not coming slow, and they are coming pretty fast at them, and they're able to block it. And it's a fun experience, which has allowed a lot of these players to flourish since then. And they go back actually and enjoy now. They're no more afraid of those Mr. and Mrs. Bangers who come really, really hard at them, and they are completely more confident now how to deal with that type of speed. There was recently a woman in Tucson boot camp who had come down, and she was a little frail little woman from Oregon State, and she was really scared about all those balls coming. But after going through a few number of ball machine sessions, she was so confident that she looked like as if she was actually dancing on the court. She was so relaxed and so chilled out that it didn't really matter how that ball was coming. She was ready for everything, and it was a pleasure to watch her be so relaxed when she was so scared and so frozen, and felt like we could just blow her and she would just fall, a type of thing. There she was able to block that ball, and I was very, very happy to see her do that.
And then moving on to Sunday morning session, which is dancing with your partner, everybody's favorite session, or most everybody's favorite session. This is where all the proverbial light bulbs go off.
Definitely one of the best sessions because it really comes together for them with all the sessions which they have had before, to building consistency and about their net play and all that. And now it's all about placement and positioning and partner communication, one of the topics we talked today. In those three conversations, the three topics are very important. One, partner communication, partner play, and partner positioning and placement are going to be very much the focus of this particular session. By now, they start understanding how to play with a partner and where to be on the court and what type of shots would allow them to be where they want to be, type of things, and understanding of their own particular game. And this session has been a big aha moment for most players. By the time they come to this session, they have worked so much on their other skill sets, and they come here, and as Randy said, light bulbs are not only coming in, and all of a sudden, they're really dancing with their partners on the court. And that's a wonderful sight. As a coach, as anyone watching how players play in tandem, that session is a beauty to watch.
And one of the questions we get about this is, what happens when your partners don't listen to you, or when your partner doesn't follow that same strategy? And you said earlier, you can only control what you can control. But a lot of times, once this person starts going out there and then comes back and starts playing with these people and starts explaining the strategy to it, that pretty much helps out the people that he's normally playing with to begin with. It seems, at least it seems that way to me. That certainly happened where I play with certain players that actually want to dance with you.
When you have an audience who's willing to understand it, or I'm not talking about an audience, there are people and partners who are willing to share, then it makes any conversation easier. It's as I said, if you have people who want to do it, that's why I often say to even fellow coaches, you can only coach people who want to be coached. Don't coach people who don't want to be. So the same way is like, if people are willing to hear your wonderful strategy and are open to it, conversations can be easier. But trying to pound a wall and doesn't work. And I often say is if you keep hitting the ball harder and harder on a brick wall, I will guarantee you the ball will just keep coming back to you. Maybe at some point it might crack, but most of the time it's going to come back at you. The only time I'm going to throw a ball really, really, really hard is when I'm actually in the atmosphere and knowing that the air has little resistance, but it will probably go through where it is no resistance. So I would use my French expression "libre comme l'air," which basically means free like air. So it's you can only control the controllables, and you can only share things with partners and people who are willing to or want to dance with you. But if it isn't the case, still have fun playing your own game.
Yeah, one thing to go back to the communication part of it, when it comes to advice and coaching, some people don't want to be coached, and they just want to go out and have a good time. I mean, some people will come up and they'll ask for information, or they'll say, no, I want to play with you because I want you to tell me, what I can do better or what I should have done after the shot, what have you. Other players, especially when I'm on the other side of the court, you'll hear them grumble, you need to get a third shot drop, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. You really shouldn't let this get under your skin when you're playing pickleball, should you? Just to kind of have an interlude with our boot camp conversation.
No, not really. I'll have to be honest with you on that one. It doesn't really bother me. I just smile. And I've heard this one. When I'm playing even, it doesn't mean that I'm the greatest exponent of all those strategies. I never would claim that. But having said that, and I don't even chuckle about it. I just like, okay, I'm just going to have fun. It's pickleball is supposed to be fun, and I'll continue having fun. As you rightfully said, there are people who are there and they just want to have fun. They don't want to be coached at. So be it. It's totally fine. It's only pickleball, as I said. It's nothing more and nothing less.
Yeah, you're not taking a tournament win to your grave, and you're certainly not taking a rec play win to your grave. That I can guarantee also.
Absolutely.
And then the final session, Michelle kind of asked about this earlier, the next to the last session on Sunday afternoon. This is the one-on-one time. And during the one-on-one time, a lot of players are either playing on one court and practicing certain things from the other ones, from the other sessions. There's a couple of players on another court with two ball machines coming at them if they want to play in front of the ball machines. But the gist of this session is the actual one-on-one time that they're getting with you, which has generally been running, 30 to 45 minutes?
Oh, wow. It's a lot.
Sometimes even an hour. Yes, it has been a long session, but again, Randy and I are both committed to each of those participants having a really wholesome experience. So we don't really limit our time to saying like we should only cap it to 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that. We will do the maximum possible, and these one-on-one sessions depends on how many questions each of these participants have and the drills we might have to do to get them and enact those things so that they can actually use those drills when they go back home. And it's not only an assessment about their game, but also what I want them to work, and I'll also give them strategies and drill sets, which I normally give them. And normally about a month or 2 months after their boot camp experience, I generally call back on each and every participant from that particular boot camp and check in with them about their progress and wanting to know if there's anything they struggle with, if there's any strategies or any other drills I would like to give them. If they would like to get on the phone, I would be happy to send them or information. But it's an experience which I really normally follow up with each and every of my students, and I continue to doing so with most of my students, past students till this point.
Yeah, and the other reason why I mentioned we have other people doing the ball machine or playing or practicing on the other courts is it's during the one-on-one, it's not just praying, hanging out with this one person, telling them what to do for 45 minutes, and everyone else is kind of sitting on their hands. They're actually doing something, yeah, or fighting against the ball machine. And then on Monday morning, to go back a second, and just to show how much time Prem's spending, I think the session ends at 4 on Sunday, and I think the last boot camp, it was 6:30 or 7 that we were there.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So you're getting a lot of time on the courts and with Prem when you come to these boot camps. Last session on Monday is essentially where we kind of come full circle. You started the boot camp with an evaluation and assessment where you're playing different games with the different participants. And then on Monday, you're doing the same thing, except you're trying to incorporate all of the skills and strategies that you learned from the previous 3 days.
Get to work what you just learned. Very good.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is actually a lot of game time. So most of the thing is going to be game time. There'll be a few stop and goes here and there, and say why the shot was done, what was intention behind the shot, and what were you trying to execute, so that you start actually analyzing your own game, so that you have a game plan when you get into a court, and because you already now know all the strategies by the time the boot camp is over. But now, why did you choose this shot over that, and why didn't you? So that you have a better understanding of your complete game, and so that then this is where it's all about you taking charge of your own game, and to your strengths, each one's strengths, and working with that place. It's a fun session. It's a 3-hour session. There's a lot of play. Each one plays against each other, and work on their different strategies, and figure out their strengths, and also their weaknesses, and what they need to do to improve, to go to the next level. And so there's not a lot of stop and go in this one. It's mostly playtime, but it's also a lot of live commentary when it's needed, without interrupting the flow of the game.
And so that's the pickleball instruction and coaching. But as Prem also mentioned earlier, we really try and go above and beyond. We don't want you worrying about where you're going to have to go eat, where you're going to get all the water to hydrate. Meaning we don't want you to have to bring your own 24-pack of water every single day. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, we provide all the water, sports drinks, fruit, snacks. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we provide a catered lunch. So you don't have to worry about where you're going to drive out in whatever town that we're in and doing this. When you sign up, you receive immediate access to the Drop Shot Masterclass and an electronic version of Prem's best-selling book, Smart Pickleball. And when you arrive at boot camp, you'll get a t-shirt, a swag bag full of lots of goodies, and a Guru signature paddle. Is there anything else that I'm missing that they're not getting at boot camp, Prem?
Oh, they are definitely getting one important thing, the best quality you can ever imagine, Randy Mantiply.
As I like to joke, Prem's the front of the house and I'm the back of the house. Prem's there to ensure you receive the best pickleball instruction in the world, which he does a good job at. And I'm there to ensure that everything goes as smoothly, as seamlessly as possible. And then so far, we've done a pretty good job at doing that. Well, we've done a really great job of doing that, actually. Yeah. And the past participants, they've all been pretty grateful and amazed with all they receive at boot camp. And you were just kind of alluding to that. This really is a complete experience that we're giving everyone. It's not just showing up at the court for a few hours every day for some drills and saying, when someone hits a shot to you, you should probably do this. It's not that. It's more of a really complete experience that everyone takes home with them. Even with all this, and this is a pay as you go, but Friday night we all get together at a local restaurant so that all the participants can meet with each other and have dinner with us. Just kind of like a break the ice type thing, and everyone gets to know each other to make it an even more pleasant and fun boot camp experience.
That's right. I mean, it's like a meet and greet, but it's really getting to know each other. As the days go by, there's a sort of a familiarity, and sort of a camaraderie, which is developed between the participants. In fact, so they sort of hold each other in this group, because they're all there to improve and progress, and then they are also empathize with each other's strife, because they can recognize their own probably that, and so that meet and greet has been really a big highlight, because this is sort of people getting to know each other outside the pickleball court, or very on the onset itself, that gives them sort of an occasion to get to know them differently from a pickleball court, and then and that somehow relates to participants really enjoying each other. And I've heard people feeling really saddened to leave on the final day because they found a family which they felt very connected to, and I think it's also very emotional for Randy and me, and each and every time that experience happens, and it still remains a very emotional one for us. But we enjoy it, and we'll continue doing it, even if it troubles us.
So if you're somewhere between a 3-0 and a 4-0 player and want to improve your pickleball game, here's the upcoming schedule for boot camps. We have Richmond, Virginia. It's in May 17th. And I'm not sure when we're going to publish this, but right now there's one spot left. Cincinnati, Ohio starts on July 12th. Vail, Colorado is in August, but it's sold out. We just sold out that, I believe it was like a week and a half ago. Sacramento, California is on September 20th. Kona, Hawaii, October 25th. Tucson, Arizona, November 15th. And if you're looking forward to 2020, we have 3 boot camps open right now in Vero Beach, January 10th, January 24th, and February 14th. As I mentioned earlier, at each of these boot camps, we limit them to only 8 participants. Richmond only has 1 left. Vail sold out, and the others are filling up. The camps in Vero in January already have players signed up, and these aren't until 2020. As an added incentive, sign up for any of these camps, and by April 30th, and you'll receive an extra $500 off. Prem, we always offer an additional discount for participants signing up together. When you have 2 people coming, it's more fun, especially when you're bringing your partner. I mean, especially like when you talk about the dancing with your partner session. Obviously that translates, but just in general, it's more fun when you're coming with a partner.
It makes it easier to have a cohesive dancing partner when you're playing with regularly with your partner, be it the men partner or women partner. Either way, I think it's always a fun one to play. Bring your partner together, and if that's the case, that makes it easier because both of you have the same understanding by the time the boot camp is over, and makes it easier to transition and translate that in future games when they're playing and honing the skill together. So I would definitely recommend that. But having said that, if you are only by yourself, that's totally fine too. And it works either way. But if you do have a partner, I would definitely recommend you to bring your partner. I'm talking about your pickleball partner, but obviously it could be your spouse too.
Yes, my wife would not appreciate me bringing her to a boot camp one bit. But the other upside, if you're coming with a partner, is if you send me an email, and I'll give you my contact information later on, we'll give you an additional discount on top of the $500 off. And you also mentioned this earlier, the learning doesn't stop after boot camp because you, like about 2 to 3 weeks after boot camp, you typically call the participants to make sure that their pickleball game is coming along okay?
Yes, I do. I normally do, and I normally call them back as long as I'll harass them as much as they want me to harass them, but in a good way. This is not marketing or trying to rehook them back. It's sincerely me really wanting to check in with their progress and their strides, and so that I can help them with anything on the phone and give them any suggestions. And sometimes I happen to be in their neighborhood. I will visit them and maybe help them with the next level of strategy they might need. So it's not it's never really meant to be a business thing at that point. It's really heartfelt desire to see them improve and enjoy playing the game.
And do you have any other questions,
No,
Michelle?
I don't. He's answered all of them, as I knew he would.
Yeah, he does a pretty good job
I
of it.
know.
And I apologize, I picked my cat up because otherwise he'll start meowing while I'm doing this. If you're ready to sign up for one of Prem's boot camps, head on over to either www.pballbootcamp.com or www.pickleballgurus.com/bootcamp. Like I said, our contact information is Prem's phone is 773-615-0478. That's 773-615-0478. His email is prem@thepickleballguru.com. My number is 703-459-0001. My email is randy@thepickleballguru.com. These are our mobiles, so feel free to call, text, or email us. And as I mentioned earlier, boot camp is for those 3 to 4-0 players that pretty much have the fundamentals down. But for those players that would like to work on fundamentals and more basic strategies, you have a good number of clinics coming up, Prem. Could you talk about clinics and how they differ a little bit from boot camps?
The clinics are more for beginners and intermediate players, generally people who really need to get their fundamentals in and have a good understanding of that. It's limited to, a maximum of 48 people. We do have people to assist us, but generally on 8 pickleball courts, we have about 48 people maximum, minimum of 24. Generally, these groups, we have a 2-day session. It's 2.5 hours each day, and we work on different parts of like the serves, then the returns of serve, the drop shot, the third shot drop. I mean, the dings, the volleys, the putaways. So it's basically a good understanding of the fundamentals of the game and the effectiveness of it. And it's a bigger group generally, and the fundamentals are worked, and they all get to actually spend time on the court. But obviously, nothing to take away from the clinics. It's a limited time, and it's not as intensive as a boot camp. Boot camp has a lot of hours and a lot of personal time. Each one of these participants will get some individual time with me, but not as focused and intensive as the boot camp is. The clinic is a very good kickstart for getting your fundamentals in. And I think, Michelle, you're a better proponent of speaking about a clinic, since you have been a clinic participant a couple of times, and so maybe you might be the best person to answer your experience of a clinic. And even though you might not have taken the boot camp, at least give some ideas on what your experience was.
My experience at the clinics were amazing. As I said earlier, they were definitely game changing. I remember the first clinic, it was about 170 degrees outside, and we really thought we were going to die, but nothing could have pulled me off the court. It was, I have to be here and do this. And the following year wasn't as hot, but it was just as informative. And your strategies and teaching are amazing in pickleball. And I definitely feel like I am a smarter pickleball player from taking your clinics, definitely.
Thank you, Michelle. So I think that probably sums it out for people who really want to take a clinic. There's no way to go around it unless you get your fundamentals right. Even at the highest levels, when in doubt, I always suggest them to go back to your fundamentals, get your fundamentals right, and you can always, it should be your bedrock of your foundation before you can jumpstart anything in your game. So these clinics are wonderful, in really reinforcing and making your game very good at the fundamental level. And again, I don't have any specific strategy of saying that this is the only way to do. I never claim it as being the only way to do it. It's only a way to do it and not the way. But having said that, it's a very effective, smart strategy. But obviously, if there is something in their game they really, really are good at doing, and I normally never dissuade them from it. I actually ask them to keep it and add everything else they would learn in these clinics in their arsenal. Hope I answered your question, Randy.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The next clinics are in Richmond in May, in Cincinnati in July, in Vail in August, Sacramento, September, Tucson, November, and we have 2 sets of clinics in Vero Beach in January. You want to check out pickleballguru.com and go to the clinic page, and you'll see a whole list of all the clinics available to you. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you came across this webinar on the YouTubes or on the interwebs after its original broadcast, if you haven't signed up already, head over to the pickleballguru.com to join Guru Nation. This is where you can sign up for lots and lots of absolutely free pickleball strategies, tips, and tricks, including a monthly newsletter, podcasts, webinars, Prem's ratings and goal guide, which he mentioned earlier, and much, much more. Michelle unfortunately had to leave, so she doesn't have anything to add right now. And finally, Prem, is there anything that you would like to add?
Absolutely. Just go have fun on the pickleball court. It's only pickleball. Just have fun.
Thank you so much. And that is actually where Michelle ran off to. And especially thank you to Michelle for joining us. And paddles up, Guru Nation, and it's only pickleball. And what I'll leave you again with is our contact information. If you're ready to go to a boot camp or a clinic, please check out www.pickleballguru.com or give us a call or email, and we will hook you up. Thank you very much, and thank you, Prem.
Thank you, Randy.
Kind of leading into that, are there why are you smiling?
Nothing. You're talking about touchy subjects, so
Okay.
sounds like Randy is very tired. It's a cheat day, Randy. It's a cheat day, right?
It is a cheat day. Yeah, me, Michelle, and my wife, we all went out to an Indian restaurant earlier.
It's delicious.
The Manassas one?
No, here in Warrenton. The little town of Warrenton has a decent Indian restaurant, believe it or not. Doesn't want to be that way. But he does this to me every time. I don't know whether he reads the copy or not, but he always goes like 2 pages ahead with everything to talk about every single time.
That's why it's Guru Nation, not Randy Nation.
He likes
well, that's the problem.
I'm throwing him off so much that he doesn't know what he do.
Well, because we've already talked about something, I have to skip ahead and figure out where I need to skip. Because again, you already covered it. And just as an aside, there you go again, going ahead with other stuff. So,
sorry.
Did you and Prem talk before this?
Yeah, we've got. Sorry, take that out. Just never mind. I didn't ask that
No,
question.
go ahead. Go ahead.
She's nervous of telling anything else because you might have 2 pages late or something, which she had already.
No, she's doing great. Talk about that. We talked about that because you always go ahead.
Randy can edit this out, but during a tournament one time, I hit my partner twice with my paddle when he poached in front of me and took the ball and hit it into the net. And Randy can edit that out, but I'm very proud of those hits.
And where did you hit him?
One on the shoulder and one on the head.
You actually hit him in the head?
I told him when he's poaching so much, he's taking my forehand in the right court, he's poaching too much.
Tall man's plight.
Well, what I always say is if they make the poach, it's okay. If they miss the poach,
Right,
then there's an issue.
Exactly. It's called a poach.
Same thing when I call the shot and they take it. If they make the point, then that's fine. If they screw it up, I'll typically mention, you know I called that, right? Yeah, no, but...
What, mise en place?
No, that's not. That's meal prep, not a meal prep kit. See, I know some French.
Yeah. Meal prep kit. Are you there? You're frozen, guys.
You were frozen too. I was thinking he was processing the information. Like,
No.
I don't answer this.
There was a.
And Michelle's single, so I'm going to give you her contact information. And if you're a pickle